How can a decision made in Washington, Brussels, or London freeze a billionaire's yacht, block a central bank's reserves, and turn normal business into a crime overnight? Sanctions don't work by magic. They work because a hidden, highly engineered global system enforces them. What looks like simple economic pressure is actually a precise control system over money, trade, and technology, one of the most powerful tools in global politics today. Sanctions are not announcements, they are infrastructure. When a government announces new sanctions on the news, the real work has usually already happened. Lawyers have drafted legal authorities, intelligence agencies have compiled evidence, financial regulators have prepared list updates. Banks and corporations are already adjusting compliance systems before the press conference even ends. At the heart of sanctions is a simple idea: deny access. Access to money, to markets, to insurance, to technology, to shipping, to legal protection. What makes this effective is that the modern global economy runs on shared systems. If you can control those systems, you don't need soldiers or missiles. You just need databases, rules, and enforcement. This is why sanctions today behave less like temporary policy tools and more like permanent infrastructure. Once a country or individual is plugged out of the system, getting back in can take years, if it happens at all. UN sanctions and national sanctions. There are two main layers of the sanctions world. The first is the United Nations Security Council. These sanctions carry global legitimacy and are supposed to be implemented by all UN member states. Since the 1960s, the UN has created more than 30 sanctions regimes, with over a dozen still active today, targeting terrorism, nuclear proliferation, and armed conflicts. The second layer is much larger and far more aggressive: national and regional sanctions. The United States, European Union, United Kingdom, Canada, and others run their own sanctions systems under domestic law. These can move faster than the UN, go further, and target more actors. In practice, these national sanctions now dominate the global system, especially when major economies coordinate their actions. This is where sanctions stop being symbolic and start becoming operational. How names become economic death sentences. The most important weapon in the sanctions system is not a law or a speech. It is a list. Sanctions lists are massive databases containing names of individuals, companies, ships, aircraft, and even crypto wallets. They include aliases, addresses, passport numbers, ownership structures, and historical links. Once a name appears on these lists, banks and companies around the world are expected to act immediately. In 2024 alone, the United States added more than 3,000 individuals and entities to its main sanctions list, with Russia-related designations dominating the totals. The United Kingdom's sanctions list reached well over 4,000 total entries by early 2024, covering dozens of regimes. These are not static lists. They are updated constantly, sometimes daily. The moment a name appears, compliance systems light up across the global economy. Bank accounts are frozen, payments are blocked, contracts are terminated, insurance is withdrawn. Even companies that are not legally required to comply often do so anyway, because the risk of getting it wrong is simply too high. Banks, the reluctant enforcers of global power. Governments design sanctions, but banks enforce them. Every major financial institution now runs continuous sanctions screening. Customers are checked, transactions are scanned, ownership structures are analyzed. If anything triggers a potential match, everything stops. Payments are delayed, funds are frozen, investigations begin. This is not because banks enjoy doing this. It is because penalties for getting sanctions wrong can reach hundreds of millions of dollars, along with reputational damage that no global bank can afford. Regulators have made it clear that ignorance is not a defense. If you touch sanctioned money, even accidentally, you are responsible. To tighten this system further, regulators have modernized reporting requirements. In the United States, for example, reporting of blocked and rejected transactions has been pushed into centralized digital systems, making it easier for authorities to audit compliance and spot patterns. Sanctions are no longer just rules. They are monitored workflows, controlling the money pipes. If lists are the weapon, payment systems are the battlefield. Global finance depends on shared messaging networks that allow banks to talk to each other. When access to these systems is restricted, international trade becomes slower, more expensive, and sometimes impossible. This is why restrictions on financial messaging systems have become such a powerful tool. When major Russian banks were cut off from key international payment channels after the invasion of Ukraine, the impact was immediate. Even where payments were technically legal, banks hesitated, delays multiplied, and uncertainty spread. The goal was not total shutdown, it was friction. Enough friction to weaken the system without breaking the global economy itself. Sanctions designers think in terms of pressure, not collapse, at least in theory. Sanctions go beyond money. Modern sanctions are not just about freezing accounts. They are about limiting capability. Export controls now sit tightly alongside financial sanctions. Advanced chips, machine tools, aerospace components, and energy technology are restricted because they are essential to modern military and industrial power. In 2024, the United States sharply expanded its export control lists, adding hundreds of new entities linked to sensitive technologies. This approach recognizes a simple reality. Money alone does not win wars or sustain power. Technology does. By restricting access to critical components, sanctions aim to slow not just economies, but entire strategic ambitions. Chasing trade across the oceans. As sanctions tightened on banks and trade, attention shifted to shipping. Global trade moves by sea, and ships are surprisingly flexible. They change names, flags, owners, routes, and insurers. This has created a cat-and-mouse game between regulators and what is often called the shadow fleet. By 2025, the European Union had listed more than 500 vessels linked to sanctions evasion, especially in the energy trade. These listings target not just ships, but the web of services that keeps them moving, including insurance, port access, and maintenance. This is sanctions enforcement turning into logistics warfare. Sanctions as systems engineering. One of the most innovative sanctions ideas in recent years has been the oil price cap on Russian crude. Instead of banning Russian oil outright, which could have caused global price spikes, the policy focused on services. Shipping, insurance, and financing were allowed only if oil was sold below a fixed price, set at $60 per barrel. This approach treats the global oil market like a machine with choke points. Control the choke points, and you influence the system without pulling it apart. It is a perfect example of how modern sanctions are designed by economists, lawyers, and engineers, not just politicians. When sanctions become permanent, perhaps the most dramatic evidence of how far sanctions have evolved is the freezing of sovereign assets. By late 2025, European governments had agreed to indefinitely immobilize roughly 210 billion euros in Russian central bank reserves held in Europe. This is not a temporary measure. It represents a shift toward treating sanctions as long-term financial control mechanisms. Discussions around using the interest from these assets to support Ukraine have sparked intense legal and political debate, raising questions about property rights, immunity, and precedent. Once sanctions reach this level, they stop looking like policy tools and start looking like permanent architecture. How fear travels faster than law. One of the most powerful features of the sanctions system is secondary sanctions. These allow governments, especially the United States, to target third-country actors who do business with sanctioned entities, even if they are not directly under the sanctioning country's jurisdiction. The effect is psychological as much as legal. Companies around the world often choose to over-comply, cutting off perfectly legal transactions simply to avoid risk. This is how sanctions extend their reach far beyond national borders, turning access to major financial systems into leverage. Evasion never stops, so sanctions keep evolving. Where there is pressure, there is adaptation. Sanctions targets use shell companies, trade misinvoicing, friendly jurisdictions, crypto tools, and complex ownership structures to keep money and goods moving. Regulators respond with anti-circumvention measures, targeting enablers and entire networks rather than single actors. This cycle never ends. Sanctions evolve because evasion evolves. And that's the part most people never see. Sanctions aren't just headlines or political threats. They're an invisible system quietly shaping who can trade, who can pay, and who gets locked out of the global economy. If you found this breakdown useful and want more deep dives into the hidden systems running the world, like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.